In a previous video, we saw how to add Firebase authentication to our Android application, and with that we used email authentication. In this video, we're going to add to that prior demonstration, we're simply going to add a new authentication provider, which is Google Authentication. If you haven't seen that previous video, I recommend watching it before this, just so you understand the framework of how Firebase authentication works. So what do we need to do? First of all, enable Google Authentication in the Firebase console. Next, generate an SHA-1 key, which we'll need to add to our Firebase console's settings. We'll do this for debug in this video. Remember to do it for your release key store as well. In other words, the key store that you use when you actually generate an APK or an AAB and deploy it on the Play Store. Finally, we need to go into our code and add Google as an authentication provider. So let's do each of these one at a time. First of all, for authentication, I click and we see users who are already signed in. Now I'm going to go to sign in method and I'm going to choose Google, and we see that this is enabled. Now a couple of things here is that it gives us some instructions that we need to add this SHA-1 fingerprint to our project settings. So we need to generate that. It's helpful first to know where our JDK is installed. So if I go to, I happen to have mine on CJDK 1.80, yours might be different. Let me navigate to the bin directory, and we'll see down here there's something called KeyTool.exe. That's the tool that allows us to generate this SHA-1 fingerprint. So I'm going to go up to the address bar and type in CMD to get a command line. And I happen to be in the CJDK directory now because that's what happens when I type CMD into the address bar. It opens up a command window to that prompt, but it doesn't matter. I could pretend I'm in any directory. What I need to do is I'm going to say C:\\, of course on a Windows computer I happen to be on, JDK 1.8.0/bin/keytool, which is that file I just showed you. Of course, be careful here. One little typo can mess this whole thing up, so be very careful. Make sure you're typing that path exactly as we see it here. Now, -export cert -list-v. What I've typed so far is going to be the same if you're doing it for a debug key store or for the release key store. Either one's going to be the same. Now, -alias. For debug, it's going to be Android debug key. For a release or an actual key store, just pay attention to the alias that you give your key store when you're making it. It generally prompts you when you're making an APK or an AAB. It will prompt you for all this information. Just remember what alias you gave it, because that's what you want to plug in here. Again, for debug, it's going to be Android debug key as we see here. -key store. In our case, I'm going to use the debug key store, which is stored on my computer at user profile. So that is an environment variable. .android/debug.keystore. That's fairly common. Yours is probably in the same place. Now, once again, this is for debug. When you're creating a production APK or AAB, you will need to have a key store located somewhere. Remember where you put it and just put that path here. That's what you use for production. Word to the wise, make many copies of that, secure them somewhere. If you happen to lose that key store, you can't redeploy, or you can't deploy an updated version of your app. That key store is something that should be protected, secured, but also make some backup copies just in case you happen to lose your computer. So anyway, I choose enter. It asks me for a password. For debug, it's going to be Android. For production use, it's going to be whatever password you associated with your alias. Alias or key store, I don't recall off the hand, but it's going to be one of the passwords that you specified when you generate this production key store. Now take a look at this SHA-1. What we're going to do is highlight it and choose enter, and that essentially copies it into the clipboard. Back on our Firebase console, let's go to Settings and choose Project Settings. Scroll to the bottom of this page and you'll see something called Add Fingerprint. Click on that, put the cursor inside, hold Control, press V. Make sure you did that trick where you highlight and press Enter to put it into the clipboard in the first place, because here you press Control V and notice it recognizes it as an SHA-1, and then we choose Save. And now it's time to implement this in code. I mentioned in a previous video I put the plumbing together for this, using Firebase Authentication and email as an authentication provider. Given that that plumbing is already here, adding another provider is very straightforward. We have our save specimen method, and a lot of this is going to stay the same. What we need to look at is this list of eligible providers that we create here. We take that list of eligible providers and we pass it into our start activity for result. That start activity for result goes off to our Firebase authentication and it says, okay, which providers has the user decided to enable? In our case now it's going to be email and Google. So our end user is going to see a prompt that says, do you want to sign in with email? Do you want to sign in with Google? And we could add Facebook, Twitter, anything else, on and on and on. But essentially that plumbing is there. All we need to do is add another entry to the providers array. Now, what's a little bit tricky is you see a whole lot of dot notation here, and so you kind of have to read through this and realize that it's building a provider entry here, and that provider entry is of type authui.idpconfig. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you're really analyzing it in the details, but we don't need to get to that level. Just take a look at it this way. Add a comma after this email builder, and let me break this on to a new line so we can see it in a bit higher detail. Now we simply say new authui.idpconfig.googlebuilder, just like so, .build, and save. I deploy the app, and now keeping with my theme of early spring blooming plants, we're going to go with the witch hazel, and we'll say this is at the Banks Cincinnati, and description we'll say spring 2019, just like so. Now we choose save. Now notice it's calling over to authentication now, and if you saw the previous video it took us straight into an email authentication, but take a look at this. Right now it gives us a choice. Sign in with email or sign in with Google. So that's generated by the list of providers that we've chosen. I'm going to go ahead and say sign in with Google. I put in my credentials and it brings up a consent screen. I choose I agree. And now that I've authenticated, you see it's going to redirect back to the app. It will take just a moment as it redirects back. Now watch closely on Firebase. I have a breakpoint set and I have it running in a different window. As soon as I release the breakpoint, we will see at least one new entry in this database. Watch as I choose F9. Boom. Take a look, sure enough, right as soon as I chose F9, we got a brand new entry into our Firebase database. So that's a look at how to implement Firebase authentication. If you want a little bit more of a step-by-step view, stay tuned. I'll run it through the debugger from the save button all the way through right now. So the breakpoints I'm going to set, we'll just do a Control F12 and we'll look for save specimen to Firebase. So that's the one that I just that I just released a moment ago. That's the one that's actually doing our saving. I will add a breakpoint to save specimen as well. Now I'll tell you what, I'll restart the application so that we can see what happens when we're unauthenticated. So I add a couple of breakpoints here, both to the authenticated part and the unauthenticated part. And finally, we'll do a Control F12 and we'll look for on activity result. And I will snap a breakpoint in here on the authorization request. Might as well put one up towards the top as well. Now I'm going to restart the application so we can take a look at it fresh. The application has loaded again. Let's get Magnolia Solangiana, Southern Magnolia, and we'll say location. We'll say Covington, Kentucky. And description, again, spring 2019. And now I'm going to choose save. Now remember, I've restarted the application, so I'm not authenticated. I choose save. It's going to say, is the user not equal to null? Because a null user indicates we're not authenticated. Sure enough, user is null. So we choose F8. And because the user is null, that means the user is not equal to null. In other words, we come to the else part. Now the else part says, let's go ahead and build up our collection of authentication providers. And now we come over here and it does that start activity for result. So it's going to bring us up the sign-in screen once again. I'm going to choose sign in with Google. And once again, I'll take this off screen because it does take just a few moments for that sign in to happen. And now I've signed in, so it goes to on activity result, which means we're hearing back from our sign-in provider. And results okay. Is it the camera request code? No. Is it the authorization request code? Yes, it is. Now we have a Firebase user, and now we're going to save our specimen to Firebase. So I choose F7, F8, F8, and I can look in the Firebase database. Let's just take a look at the last record that was added. So if I go down here, we'll expand. Hamamelis mollis, Chinese witch hazel. Notice that the magnolia has not yet been added. So I will go ahead, choose F9 to tell it to continue, run quickly back over. You might have seen just a little flash there, a flash of green, and we see now Magnolia solangiana in Covington, Kentucky. So let's do this one more time, and now we know I've already logged in. So let's watch what happens when we do it one more time. We'll pick a different plant this time. Cornus Florida, flowering dogwood, another great dogwood, so we'll go with Grove Floor. Okay. This time we'll say Spring Grove, Ohio, Spring Grove Village, which is where this particular dogwood was discovered, in Spring Grove Village. Spring 2019, and now we're going to save. What we want to look at is we want to see the flow this time. As I choose Save, we navigate back to our debugger, and this time we're going to do the first part of this if test. Last time our user was null, so we skipped right to the else part. But this time, the user's not null because the user has already authenticated. So we jump right to save specimen to Firebase, boom, boom, boom. And I will hit F9 and quickly bring the emulator back over. So you see that there is no prompt for me to log in again. It already knows I'm logged in. We navigate back to Firebase and take a look. What's our last entry here? Cornus Florida Grove Floor, Spring Grove Flowering Dogwood in Spring Grove Village, Ohio. And sure enough, we're able to save. One more thing that I will point out that I did on the previous video, I just want to emphasize it here again. Adding authentication is one thing. If we go to rules, we also need to require authentication. And I did a very basic thing here. I said any authenticated user can read or write. But nonetheless, we do need to change these rules to set our authorization level and not open it up to everybody. One more thing, let's go to authentication. And when we take a look at authentication, we'll see two different records here. The email authentication I did a little bit earlier, and now the Google authentication I did in this video. So, I hope this video has been helpful, and I look forward to reading your comments. Thank you.